or the bit at the beginning where I was just tuning up. So welcome back to Folky Fridays. This is number 49. I'll have to think of something special to do for number 50. I can't believe I've done 50 of these already, it's mad. The topic today is what makes Celtic music sound Celtic, and more specifically what makes Irish music sound Irish, because that's mainly what I talk about on this channel. And we may also have a look at what differentiates it from Scottish music and where they overlap. Obviously geographical history plays a big part in this as well. I'm not tremendously knowledgeable on history because my memory for dates and notable people is very, very poor, but I will try and weave some of that in as well if there's anything that I can actually remember the details of. To start out with, there's a few features which, just by playing along with Celtic music for a certain amount of time, you will notice to be common to most tunes. I'm going to be mainly talking about Irish tunes, but this applies also to Scottish tunes and to a lesser extent, which I will go into in a bit, to Welsh and Breton music as well. With regards to Irish tunes then, the first thing that makes Irish music sound like Irish music is that it's modal. In melodic terms, it's all based in four modes. You've got Aeolian, which is the major scale. You've got Dorian, which is like a minor type scale with a flattened third, but it's got an optimistic sixth, like in a major scale, and a flattened seventh, as in all minor scales. Then you've got Aeolian, which is the dark, miserable version of Dorian, where the sixth is flattened as well, and you've got Mixolydian. And there's some really interesting reasons why it might be that Irish music is modal. Personally, I think it's because the modes, or basically the major scale, most of the notes within the major scale, seventh notwithstanding, but all the others are made as simple ratios. So if you have one frequency that you hear, you're always going to interpret the rest of the melody in relation to your root pitch. And what your ears are doing, if you're just hearing a melody, no accompaniment, your ear has got a kind of inbuilt memory of what the root note is, and it's comparing all the other notes to that root note. This is my opinion on it anyway. I mean, I'm not a neuroscientist or a musicologist, so maybe don't quote me on this to your more scientifically minded friends, but my opinion is that this must be how it works. So you've got a kind of memory of what the root pitch is, and you're interpreting the other notes that come in based on that root pitch. And the interval between the root pitch and those other notes is what is going to make your ear feel a certain way. The other thing that your ear is doing is comparing it in its short-term memory to the notes that came before it, in order to form a kind of contour. So you're kind of hearing a melody that's a bit like a line graph going like this, you know? And then the relationship between the line at any given point is sort of how your ear is determining how to feel about the progression of that line, if you like, and that's where your melody's coming from. With Celtic music, because its roots are sort of prehistoric in a way. I mean, to call it Celtic music is a misnomer, really, because it's got nothing probably to do with the Celts. But what I'm talking about is what we refer to in modern terms as Irish traditional music, which was kind of collected from the 1700s on, I suppose. And of course, like the most famous Irish collections now are things like O'Neill's and books like that, which were from the 1800s. But these tunes are sort of fairly recent. However, there's lots of people that have studied older music than that and tried to piece together what melodies may have been used in those. And broadly speaking, the consensus is that they were also pretty much modal. If you want to find some really interesting evidence about that, by the way, look up a guy called Dr. Andreas Hirt, Aindrias. He's got some really interesting theories on looking at Fenian lays, which are obviously much older in their provenance than the music I'm talking about, and arguing about them potentially being in a different scale which is not based in the modes, which I won't go into, but it's very, very interesting if you like that sort of thing. Go and check him out. You can find all his research for free on the internet as well. Anyway, sorry, I've got sidetracked. What was I talking about? So, they're all modal anyway, that's my point. And the reasons for that are that you've got a lot of diatonic instruments, or instruments like a fiddle, where you've got one simple scale fingering that gives you a D major scale starting from the D string, or a G major scale starting from the G string. And then taking that same fingering, or the same set of notes, and if you're on a tin whistle or a kind of pipe instrument like that, you can obviously only play maybe like two and a half octaves of a given scale, I suppose, however many it is. So you've only got one particular scale, one particular major scale as a starting point, and then starting from different notes within that and finishing from the same note, you come up with the other modes of that scale. I have my own theories as to why it's Ionian, Dorian, Mixolydian and Aeolian that are used in Celtic music, and not Lydian, which is the fourth one, which is a very natural sounding mode to my ears. It seems strange that Celtic music doesn't use that mode as well. I'm not going to go into why that might be, but again, Andreas Hirt's got some interesting theories on that. It might have something to do with the church having a big impact on banning a lot of the modes, but then you would have thought that the Dorian and the Mixolydian would have disappeared as well. So I'm not really too sure on why we don't use Lydian, Phrygian. I know why we don't use Locrian. It's because it sounds awful. Starts on a diminished chord, not nice sounding. Anyway, so going back to the modes that we do use, the very early roots of this kind of music are from a time where it was mainly melody instruments. There weren't any guitars, obviously, because guitars arrived from Spain in fairly recent history. There weren't any banjos, because they were from Africa, again, fairly recently in the grand scheme of things. And obviously, accordions, no. So instruments that played chords were not really involved in the roots of this kind of music. It was melodic, and accompaniment probably would have been other melody instruments playing that. So it would have been very, very simple in its accompaniment. And that meant that the considerations that you'd put into composing a classical piece as to, if I put a certain note in a certain bar, will that define a certain chord, for example, those considerations are modern things and wouldn't really have any influence on composers of these kind of tunes that we see as being the traditional repertoire now. So you get certain melodic conventions which are for the sake of the melody and mean that the harmony is very simple. Generally speaking, if you're listening to an Irish tune, you will not find bits where it sounds like it needs chord 5, apart from in the last bar of a section, and that's why I always talk about the 7th foot tap. You know, you've got, like, if I hum a tune, let me think of a nice traditional one. A bit of a mind blank. Is that modern? That's modern, isn't it? Okay, my brain's not working today. Sorry, I'm been flat out all day with the shop being reopened now, and I'm very, very tired, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. It doesn't really matter anyway. My point is that there's not going to be any sections where it sounds like it needs chord 5, apart from on the 7th foot tap. what makes it sound like it needs chord 5 or like it needs another chord is what notes are on the dominant beats in a bar. And it tends to be, with Irish music, that the notes on the dominant beats are notes from chord 1 in most places. I'll dig into that a little bit more. I've got a diagram here somewhere which will help me show you what I'm talking about with this. If I can find the right notebook. Oh, here it is. Here we go. So, in chord 1, the notes are 1, 3, and 5, the red ones from the major scale. Those are the notes that appear in chord 1. So if we're in the key of G, for example, chord 1 is G major. The notes in it are G, B, and D. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp. In chord 4, you've got notes 4, 6, and the root note again, because those are the ones that would appear in chord 4 in G major, which would be C, so C, E, and G, the green ones. And in chord 5, you've got 5, 7, and 2, the blue ones. So if you hear a bar in which there is a note 7, for example, the 7th note only appears in chord 5, and if you hear a bar where the 7th note is on a dominant beat, it's very clear that that bar needs chord 5 with it. However, in Irish music, that doesn't happen. The only place you find the 7th note, generally, if you're in a major key, is going to be in the last bar. Or if you hear it anywhere else, it'll be a very short note and probably not on a dominant beat of the bar. That's generally true 90% of the time. The reason for that is that, going back to what I was saying before about simple ratios, within a major scale, the most simple ratio is an octave, 2 oscillations to 1. A fifth is fairly simple as well, that's 3 oscillations to 2. A major third is fairly simple as well, that's 4 to 3. And so on. And if you go through the simple ratios and then you make chords, a fourth is also very simple. So you've got 1, 3, 4, 5 as your kind of most simple options. And then if you make chords from those, so 4 up to 6, that's how you get your 6th. And 6 up to 2, that's how you get your... the major second is the next simplest after the third, after the fourth. Oh, it's 9 to 8. Okay, well, it's fairly simple anyway. It's not really super important right now, but if you go up a fifth from the fifth, you get a second. So a simple ratio from one of your simple ratios gives you a second. So these are all kind of notes that, if played against a root, would sound fairly okay with it. And that's what I'm talking about when I say that you're kind of remembering what the root note is and comparing the others, if you like. So that gives you all of your notes in the major scale, apart from the 7th. The 7th, compared to the root note, I've got it written on the wall somewhere. Oh no, I haven't. The 7th compared to the root note, I can't remember what the ratio is, but it's something exceptionally high, which means that if you play a 7th and a root note together, a lot of the time their two waveforms will be cancelling each other out, which means you get a kind of jaggedy sound wave coming into your ear, which doesn't sound very harmonious. So you've got like if I play it to you, that's a major 7th. Yeah. You've got a really nasty sounding, uncomfortable interval there. You end up with it in the major scale because it's because it's in chord 5, I suppose. A major third above chord 5 is your 7th note, so you need a major 7th in order to get chord 5. If we're talking in terms of old melodic music, though, there isn't any chord 5, therefore there isn't really a need to include this nasty sounding interval, which, if you're just thinking compared to the root note, sounds nasty. There's no need to have it. And that tends to be a thing, is that you hardly ever find the 7th note in Celtic tunes in major keys, because it's purely melody based. This is what I think, anyway. Yeah. Where you do find it, however, is you find it cropping up usually in the last bars of sections, because having that momentary tension towards the end of a section and then resolving it by going to a more comfortable note within the scale, usually the root note, kind of is a satisfying thing to do. You know, a section in a tune is kind of like building up tension and then resolving it at the end, and that's pretty much what all music is in one way or another. It kind of winds you up in some way, and then it kind of fixes itself at the end, and you go, ah, you know. But anyway, yeah, that's why I think that the 7th is rarely there in a major key, and that you will reflect the fact that it appears generally on the around the 7th foot tap by putting your chord 5 there and resolving that back to chord 1. And the reason chord 5 to chord 1 sounds resolved as well is because notes 5, 7 and 2 from the major scale are the notes that make up chord 5. So you're putting that major 7th in there, which is uncomfortable, and then you're fixing it by putting it back to the root note in chord 1. Just on the subject of the modes, if I write the intervals onto this little diagram, so the intervals within a major scale are tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone at the end. Something like that. That's the intervals within the scale. And the thing that makes purely melody-based music feel like it wants to move in a certain way, if I go da 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 da, it wants to go da da dum, it wants to carry on going up. The thing that makes it feel like it's being sucked into the next note in the melody sometimes is where the semitone gaps are within your scale. I've already kind of said, maybe in a bit of a rushed way today, but I have covered it before in other videos, roughly why we have the divisions of the scale how we do. It's because of the ratios between the root note to the notes within the scale, and the ratios between the notes within the scale, that you end up with this set of divisions being the most harmonious possible divisions of an octave. So with this set of divisions, where the semitones between the notes are, you end up with a note that kind of wants to suck into the following one. So if you play da da dum, it wants to go into chord 4 because there's a semitone gap there leading it into the next one. And likewise, when you get to 7, da 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 dum, it wants to go da dum up into 8. I'm sorry if you can't see this, by the way. I appreciate it's quite bright in here, and I hope my diagram's not being ghosted. Yeah, there's not much I can do about that at the moment, because it's unusually sunny in Sheffield today, so yeah, hopefully you can read this. Hold it a bit closer, maybe that'll help. Mirror image, there we go. Ah yeah, there we go. So yeah, with these semitones, if you're thinking of your melody, da 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 dum, you tend to find that whenever there's a 7, it's very unstable and it wants to go back to the root note, and it generally does that in the last bars of sections. And likewise, if there's a 4, if you've got like a strong 4 on a dominant beat in a tune, then that kind of feels uncomfortable, and that's a chord 4 section. That's where it feels like it's kind of gone away somewhere. And what you tend to find is that if you've got a chord 4 section, it'll then lead up into 5, and you've got your chord 5 section, and that leads you back round to 1. And that's why you kind of get this 1, 1, 1, 1, 4, 4, 5, 1 kind of structure that you get in a lot of Celtic tunes, because of where the semitone gaps are. In guitar playing terms, just on the subject of chords, if I play like G, and then I play chord 3, which is, if you recall, it's the one, 3 is the third note in the scale, has a semitone that leads it into 4. So if I play 1 and then 3, it'll want to lead into 4, like this. It kind of seems natural if I play the third chord followed by the fourth chord. So G, then B minor, wants to go into C. And even more, if I play chord 7, the diminished chord, it really sounds like it needs to go back to chord 1. If we look at D, which is chord 5, there's my root note D, and there's my major third of D, which is F sharp. F sharp compared to the root note, which is G, is the major 7th, so that really wants to go from F sharp back to G, which is why chord 5 goes back to chord 1. It makes everything sound finished. Let's take this pattern of tones and semitones then, and have a think about where those semitones are in the other modes, because that has some interesting implications. Oh, just quickly, why am I talking about this in relation to Irish music? Because in more modern music, where they were thinking of adding harmonic instruments and where the harmony could be built into the melody, if I take an English tune, like, I was playing one before, English music has sevenths spotted about all over the place, and where the sevenths are, if you listen to like a Morris dance tune, you'll find the 7th, and where the 7th is, you'll put a chord 5. So there's one. So there's my major 7th, and ending on A. So there, we're not on a 7th foot tap, but there's a 7th in the tune, therefore it has to be a chord 5 section. But you don't get that in Irish tunes, and I think it's probably because of the fact that melodic accompaniment has only been, harmonic accompaniment rather, has only been a more recent addition in the Irish stuff. So outlining chords in the tune isn't really done. The conventions that are adhered to are, you stick within one mode, you don't deviate from it, apart from in one case which I'll come on to in a second. You move in small jumps, so if you go something like that, the biggest gaps that you're going to do are adjacent notes within the scale, or thirds, or potentially fourths, or potentially fifths, but they're quite rare. And if you do a jump bigger than a third, you often find that after a big jump, the tune changes direction. So if I take Morrison's Jig as an example, so we've got root to fifth, back again, adjacent notes, root to fifth, then we're going up the scale, we go up the scale, we come down the scale, then we go down a third, and down another third. So it's all, there is a fifth at the beginning, but it changes direction after the big jump, and then it's all thirds and adjacent notes. And those kind of conventions are true for pretty much all Irish music, and I think, and as well for most Celtic music. And I think that's because if your brain is trying to process just a melody on the basis of a root note, it's easier to, it also needs to know what the notes near it were and how it relates to those, and brains are much better at processing small gaps because they're easier to compute than a great big leap, you know. You can test this yourself. If you play yourself intervals like a major third, your ear's going to be pretty good at recognising, oh, that's the sound of a major third, that's the sound of a second, this is the sound of a fifth. If I play those same intervals and I move them up an octave, that's a third, that's a second, that's a fifth, you might find that you may not, depending how good your ears are, but you might find that you find it harder to detect what they are when they're an octave away. So yeah. But anyway, so yeah, we tend to move in small jumps, and then thirds or fifths, occasionally an octave. If there's a big jump, you often change direction. That's the kind of conventions of Irish music. And also, if you're in a major key and you're going to have the seventh note, it's going to appear in the last bars of sections. If you're in the other modes, then, if we were in the Dorian mode, for example, we'd be taking our pattern of intervals, but we'd be starting from the second, within relative to the major scale. So if we had a C major scale and we started and finished from D, we'd be in the key of D, Dorian. So your semitones are in a different place now, and you'll find that your chords kind of reflect that. So if I'm in D Dorian, for example, there is no great imperative. If I play chord 7, there's no huge imperative to go back to chord 1 because it's a tone away now. It's not an uncomfortable semitone away. So if you're in D minor, D Dorian, then you play C natural, which is your 7 chord. That's quite comfortable, whereas chord 7 in a major key is like a no-no and very uncomfortable. And that's why sometimes if you're in a minor key, you can put chord 7 or chord 5 in sections other than the bit at the end of the 7th foot tap bit. You can put those chords in other places as well because they're not half as uncomfortable as they would be in a major key. Where the semitones are, if you're in Dorian, is between 2 and 3. So if I was in A Dorian, playing along with like the Cliffs of Moher or something like that, if I play B minor, it wants to go up into C. And actually, you tend to find, I didn't mention this before, but you tend to find that the chords that are before the semitones, actually you probably, if you play them, they don't sound that good. So if I was in A Dorian, I wouldn't play B minor, I'd play the first inversion of G instead. Sounds a lot nicer, but that's kind of by the by, I suppose. The other one, if I'm in A Dorian, we've got a semitone between chord 6 up to chord 7. There's my chord 6, and it wants to go into chord 7. Like that. Here's an interesting thing. If you're in Dorian, you've got a flattened third, and you've got a flattened 7th, but you've got a normal 6th. So there's a semitone between the 6th and the 7th in Dorian. If you're in Aeolian, on the other hand, your 6th is flattened, so there's a semitone not between the 6th and the 7th, but between the 5th and the 6th. And that means if I play the same chord progression, chord 1 in A minor, followed by chord 6, if I'm in Dorian, there's my raised 6th. That's an inversion of a D with a thumb, which is a substitute for F sharp diminished. Or I could play F sharp diminished. That wants to lead into G, because my semitone is pointing upwards. If I was in A Aeolian, I've got F. F is now my chord 6, because the 7th is flattened. And that one, the semitone is pointing down to the 5th. So if I'm in Aeolian, I get this dark. That's the kind of tendency of the chords, and if I'm in Dorian, I get something more positive. Like that. And all that is just because of the power of the semitone gaps. Let's move on to Mixolydian, because I said before there was some funny business with 7ths, which I'd come on to. If you're in Mixolydian, the Mixolydian mode is like a major scale, but the 7th note's flattened. That means that your semitone is between 6 and 7, and 7 back to 1 is a tone. Now this is a funny thing about the major scale, is that in the major scale you've got the major 7th, which is a very unstable interval compared to the root note. It's basically not very harmonious at all if you play it alongside the root note, and that's what makes it really want to resolve back to 1. The flattened 7th, on the other hand, is quite harmonious. It's a simpler frequency ratio than the major 7th. So if I play a note, here's its major 7th with it, and here's its flattened 7th, which is a lot nicer. So you can hear it straight away. The flattened 7th is a much more natural sound. And that's why when you're in Mixolydian, it's very comfortable to use the flat 7th in the melody, and people tend to use it in the melody a lot because it is what makes it clearly different from a major tune, what makes it interesting really. So they tend to throw them in there a lot. So if you've got a tune like, there's my 7th. So the 7th was in there quite a lot. The semitones in that one then are between chord 6, so if we're in D Mixolydian, chord 6 is B minor, and that wants to lead up to chord 7 because there's a semitone separating the two. So if I play... you can hear there it kind of sounds natural for it to come back up again. And the other place there's a semitone in Mixolydian is, like in the major scale, you've got between the 3rd and the 4th a semitone pointing upwards. So there it is there. And how many times do you hear folk guitarists do this? Those kinds of things. Or if you're in Mixolydian. so your semitone between the third and the fourth is still effective in Mixolydian. That has two interesting properties. Number one is that because the seventh isn't really wanting to lead back to 1, when you play chord 5 doesn't have a strong pressure to lead back to chord 1, and nor does chord 7. And that's because chord 5 in Mixolydian is A minor, A, C and E. So chord 5 there has that flattened 7th from the D scale in it, which is the C. And that has no strong pressure to go back to D. So 5-1 doesn't sound that resolved in Mixolydian. It doesn't really sound that much like it's an ending. It sort of does because we're used to doing it at the ends of Mixolydian tunes, but in terms of like pure feeling, if you'd never played any music or heard any music before, I'm sure you would agree that that sounds less finished than that does, or that. What does sound quite finished in Mixolydian is going from chord 3 up to chord 4. So if I was playing a tune in D Mixolydian, there are a lot of times where it might actually sound nice to end a section on chord 4 instead of chord 1, because it actually, because of the kind of placement of the semitones, in some ways it can sound more finished. And I'll, just because I find it quite interesting, I'll demonstrate this with one of the Folk Friend play-alongs. Just bear with me a minute, I'll find a nice Mixolydian one I can show you this with. Doobie-doobie-doobie-doobie-doo. Got a Mixolydian one somewhere? Let's see. Choice Wife, D Mixolydian, here we go. If you want to look at the Folk Friend play-alongs, by the way, they give you like 3 versions of the chords on screen for every tune and a write-up of the music theory. You do have to pay for them, but you get 20 for 25 quid, which is absolutely loads of tunes to practice along with, all at 3 different speeds, on-screen karaoke chords, chord diagrams, a write-up of how the theory works and how you can take things from them and use them for your backing in other tunes. So they're, I'm biased because I made them, but they really are quite good. Go and buy them if you like the channel and you want to help me not starve. You can get them on this link, which I will put in the chat in just a second. Thanks, Chonky, I'm glad you're enjoying it. I thought it might be a bit conceptual today, but I'm glad you're finding it interesting. So yeah, here's a tune in Mixolydian, and I'm going to go from chord 3, which is like D over F sharp, D with a thumb, and end a section on G, just to show you that it sounds nice, but only in Mixolydian. So that was at the end of every line I was putting in G, which is chord 4, instead of ending on chord 1. And that just works in Mixolydian because of that placement of the semitones. Yeah, so that's one thing that I thought was interesting. There's another thing which stems from this lack of harmonic accompaniment as well, which is, or potentially it stems from the nature of the scales. But anyway, yeah, in minor keys, in Dorian and Aeolian tunes, there's very rarely a 6th. 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 is that what would have been the uncomfortable interval, the major seventh, the note that is most uncomfortable in relation to the root note, in the major key, in a major scale, if you think about the Dorian mode, it's like you've got that same set of intervals, but you're starting and finishing from the second note, which means that what used to be the seventh is now the sixth. So the sixth offset against the other notes within the scale is quite a kind of uncomfortable note there. If you are in the Aeolian, so if I was in E Aeolian, my sixth is C sharp, so that doesn't really sound too comfortable together. I mean, it's a minor third if you're taking the lower one as the root note, or it's you know, a major sixth the other way around. If you think about in the Aeolian mode where that sixth is flattened, that is a major third from the lower one to the root note, so that's quite comfortable that way round. But if you play a root note and you play the sixth against it, I don't think it's a very comfortable sound at all. That kind of just sounds like that sixth needs to resolve because it's pointing down a semitone to the fifth. Much more consonant. And if you do, then you've become Eminem. But yeah, anyway, so anyway, my point is the sixth is not really a very comfortable interval in either the Dorian or the Aeolian, and that's why it doesn't really crop up much in the minor keys. Oh, thank you, Jared. I'm glad you're enjoying it. I will do. I'll be doing lots more. Yeah. If you've got any suggestions for content you'd like to see as well, just drop me an email. It's either info@finaleguitar.co.uk or info@folkfriend.co.uk. But yeah, any excuse to waffle about music theory, I'm always on it. Anyway, yeah, so the sixth is quite an uncomfortable interval, and so in the two minor modes, you don't hear the sixth in them that much. You'll hear lots of tunes. If I go back to Morrison's Jig, no sixth so far. There's one, but only for a second. No sixth anywhere in that whole section, so there's one sixth in the whole of the A part there. So that's an example, but this is like a universal convention within Irish and Scottish and general Celtic music as well. More so in Irish though, and Scottish. Yeah, you don't get sixths very much, and that means that you can mix and match between Aeolian and Dorian chords, and I've talked a lot in previous videos about ways that you can do that. But I just thought you might find it interesting why that is. People that are modern day human beings and have grown up listening to music where harmonies are included, people generally tend to plump for the Aeolian style chords, even to go with Dorian tunes. So for example, if you're in E minor, you'd probably find them using A minor. They'll probably find that more kind of sounds right in their head as the right harmony to go with a tune in E Dorian. So Morrison's, there's an A minor. So those are all Aeolian chords. Here's what it sounds like using chords just from the Dorian mode for comparison. A lot more positive. But the fact is that because the sixth isn't there, theoretically you can use both, so that's really fun to play about with, and there's a lot of scope there. I just want to take a step back and point out something I forgot to say before as well. When I was talking about the Mixolydian mode, I said that the raised seventh was very the major seventh is very uncomfortable, and it's flattened in the Mixolydian mode, which means there's not a strong incentive to go from chord 7 back to chord 1 or chord 5 back to chord 1. Because of that, what you tend to find in Mixolydian tunes, a lot of the time you'll get something like this, where you'll have a tune that's in the Mixolydian mode up until the very last bar, and then raises the seventh just for the last bar to make it sound finished. Mixolydian, 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 major seventh. So there, it's gone C natural all the way through, and then just in the last little bar it goes like that, with a C sharp instead. So that's so that you can put your chord 5 in there and make it sound finished. If you don't do that, it might sound like I did before, like it more wants to resolve back towards G, because there's a semitone gap pointing towards G and there isn't one pointing towards D. So I suspect that's a big part of why you find so many Mixolydian tunes that do that. And maybe that's something that is a more modern flavour that kind of crossed over from other influences like church music, historically. I'm no authority on Scottish music particularly. I know way more Irish tunes, but I know there's certain rhythmic features that you get in Scottish music which you don't get in Irish music. Broadly speaking, it's modal in the same way, the same modes are used. There are certain dances and things like strathspeys and so on which you don't get in Irish music. I'm not going to talk about those because I don't know a great deal about them, but there's one really interesting thing, which is the Scotch Snap, which is a rhythmic feature which goes da 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 da, that kind of thing. If you've got a jig in Irish tunes, da da diddle dee da da diddle dee, you often get quaver, crotchet, and then 4 quavers, and that makes up the 6 quavers for your bar. Da 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 da, crotchet, quaver 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 quaver. Da 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 diddly. In Scottish music you get this thing called the Scotch Snap, or a Lombardic rhythm, which is like da 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 dum da 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 dum. So if you hear one of those in a tune, you know it's Scottish and not Irish. There is a huge amount of tunes which have crossed over from Scotland to Ireland because of the history of the transplantation of Scots into Ireland, and there's also a lot of common ground from before the Brittonic nations were kind of split up, where they all have similar melodic conventions from that time which have carried on, probably, obviously I don't have any proof, but which carried on into the modern day. So you can kind of trace that through there. But then over time as well, they've also developed little peculiarities and quirks. And obviously, Scottish and Irish music, I suspect, have been less influenced by melodic accompaniment and things which would have come from church music than Welsh music has. If you look at Welsh music, you find much more modern kind of harmony structures where you've got these kind of defined chords in some bars. And you also find things like the melodic minor will crop up, where in a minor key you take your minor chord 5 and you turn it into a major chord, so that you've put that major 7th in to make it sound more finished. So if I was writing a Welsh tune in A minor, if I wanted to write a tune that sounded Welsh, I might go along in A minor. E minor would be my chord 5, but instead of doing E minor as my chord 5, I'd do E major, and that sounds more finished, because E major's got the major 7th, which is G sharp. So that's a very modern thing, or, well, I say very modern, I mean it's still, the best part of 1,000 years, or probably 1,500 years maybe, but it's a more modern sounding thing to my ear, and it's not a thing that you find in what I think of as the traditional Celtic sound, but it is a thing that you find a lot in Welsh music, and I suspect that's because in Wales the sort of folk tradition was a lot more stamped out and a lot more impinged upon by the state and therefore the church and so on. Whereas in Ireland the music was kind of preserved a bit more. Apparently, I'm reliably informed by my friend Felix, who knows a lot more about these things than I do, that monks went around Ireland collecting tunes with official sanctions to do that, whereas in Wales it was like, no, completely flat out banned any kind of culture, as far as I understand it. Obviously, again, not a historian. But anyway, so there's a lot more kind of little modern features like that, I think, in Welsh music. And Breton music is kind of very separate. It's got a lot of very different rhythms. You do find those kind of more modern melodic features as well. But it does also have, you can tell it's got a lot of the same kind of roots, because a lot of the other conventions are in common with other Celtic musics. Anyway, that's my opinion on it, but it's something that I'll have more time to read up on and study in the future, I hope, because it's super interesting. Donegal music and Scottish very mixed. Yeah, totally, because it's like, well, they're not separated by very far, and then so many people got transplanted from one to the other that the musics have all mixed together. Yeah. That's about it for things I wanted to talk about today, and do you know what, from thinking at the start of this that this would be a short one, I seem to have rambled on for absolutely ages, so thank you all for bearing with me. I hope this has been interesting to some of you, and if you do want to find out more about this kind of stuff, let me know if you find it interesting. I will make some YouTube videos going into a bit more depth with some diagrams and some clearer explanations if this is something that interests people. If you want more info on the practical aspects for guitarists, then my first book over there, Backing Guitar Techniques for Traditional Celtic Music, will probably be interesting to you. It's got loads of stuff about where to put the chords, how to play the chords, interesting shapes. I'm working on a book about chord inversions at the moment, but once that's done I'll be doing one about how to do the same in DADGAD as well, so keep an eye out for that. Check out folkfriend.co.uk if you enjoyed this video and want to find loads more live streams and properly edited posh tutorial videos. Loads of good stuff on there, and my books and capos and strings and various things. Yeah, I don't have anything much else to say. Thank you very much to Lee Neal for tuning in. I'm really glad you enjoyed it. People out there as well, if you have enjoyed this and you are still watching, then hit the like button, because that really helps my videos get shown to more people. And obviously subscribe if you like as well, then you'll get a free tutorial off me every week, and one of these streams if you want to tune in for that as well. Thanks to Chonky. Pleasure as always. Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Stephen. Cheers for tuning in. And thank you to all the other people out there in the ether as well. Tomorrow afternoon I will have some sort of tutorial out. I haven't actually started filming it yet, which is late even for me, because the shop's been open, I haven't had any time, but I will be doing one this evening, so keep an eye out for that tomorrow afternoon. And that's it really. I'll see you all next weekend. Oh, nice one. Thank you as well to Michael for tuning in.